Her hand trembled as she held the envelope. Inside the room, voices discussed her fate as if she weren't present. A man in a suit coldly declared that women in her situation didn't deserve a second chance. She took a deep breath and raised the document no one expected to see. In that instant, the silence weighed heavier than any accusation. Before we delve into this story, leave a comment below with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The church clock struck 10 in the morning when Julia adjusted her veil for the last time. The white fabric slid between her fingers like a promise of eternity. The altar flowers exuded a sweet, almost cloying perfume, but she didn't care. She had dreamed of that moment since she met Michael 3 years earlier at a summer festival. He had an easy smile and always knew the right thing to say. He had told her she was different, special, that she deserved to be honored. The guests occupied the pews in respectful silence. Aunts murmured blessings, cousins straightened ties, children swung their legs impatiently. Julia's mother, seated in the first row, kept her hands clasped in her lap. Her eyes shone, but there was something tense in her anticipation, as if she knew, deep down, that perfect joy doesn't exist. 10:15. Father glanced discreetly at his watch. Michael still hadn't arrived. Julia smiled at her mother, feigning tranquility. Delays happen. Traffic, nerves, a million things. 10:30. The whispers began, low, almost imperceptible, but she felt them like needles on her skin. Glances crossed. Someone coughed. Another person checked their phone. 20 to 11. Michael's best man entered through the side door, his face pale. He walked up to Father and whispered something. Father closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Julia felt the ground fall out from under her even before she heard the words. The best man approached her, avoiding direct eye contact. "Julia, I'm so sorry. Michael, he's not coming." There were no screams, no dramatic fainting spell, just a silence that swallowed everything. Julia looked at the altar, at the flowers, at the dress that had cost months of savings. She looked at her mother, who slowly rose, her dignity wounded, and then she noticed the looks. They weren't of compassion, they were of judgment. "I knew it," someone murmured behind her. "A woman pregnant before marriage. It never ends well." Julia turned, but couldn't identify who spoke. The phrase hung in the air like invisible poison. Pregnant. The word that should have been a blessing had become a condemnation. Yes, she was pregnant, 3 months along. Michael knew. He had said he loved the idea of being a father, that they would do everything right, that the wedding was the beginning of a family. But now he had vanished. And she was there, exposed, dressed in white before an audience that already judged her guilty. Father approached, his voice low. "My daughter, let's end this discreetly. People will leave, you compose yourself, and tomorrow we'll talk about what to do." Tomorrow. As if there would be a tomorrow after that. Julia carefully removed her veil, folded it over her arm. She walked down the central aisle as the guests moved away, as if she carried something contagious. Her mother followed her, silent, clutching her purse tightly. Outside, the sun shone indifferently. The decorated car was still parked at the door. Colorful ribbons swayed in the wind. Julia stopped before it, observing the cruel contrast between the prepared celebration and the humiliation she had endured. Then, with mechanical gestures, she began to pull off the ribbons, one by one, slowly, like someone dismantling a dream with her own hands. In the following days, the small town did what small towns do best, spread the story. Julia avoided leaving the house, but the comments reached her. Neighbors spoke loudly on purpose when they passed her sidewalk. Poor thing, but then again, she got pregnant first, right? What did she expect? At the bakery, the clerk gave her change without meeting her eyes. At the grocery store, an acquaintance turned her face away when she saw her. Julia's mother tried to comfort her, but the words rang hollow. "This will pass, honey. People forget." Forget? Julia doubted it. In a town of 20,000, nothing was forgotten. Everything became local legend. Michael offered no explanations. He disappeared. Phone off, social media deleted, address empty. Some said he'd gone to New York, others that he was in California. A cruel rumor suggested he had fled because the child wasn't his. Julia heard that version in a bank line and had to leave before breaking down publicly. The apartment they had rented together was returned to the landlord. The furniture she'd bought on installment was returned to the store. The wedding ring, kept in a drawer, became a painful reminder of a broken promise. And the wedding dress remained hanging in the closet, a white ghost of a future that never existed. Julia spent weeks locked in her room. She no longer cried. She had exhausted her tears. She just stared at the ceiling, calculating how long it would take for her child to be born, for her to find work, to pay the bills. Her mother worked as a house cleaner, but her salary barely covered the household expenses. And now there was another mouth to feed. It was then that she made the first decision that would change everything. She wouldn't stay there waiting for the world to pity her. She wouldn't beg for forgiveness for something she hadn't done wrong. She wouldn't let them define her by the abandonment of a cowardly man. She stored the dress in a box. She sold the ring, and with the money, she bought a bus ticket to the capital city. She didn't know what she would find there, but she knew what she would leave behind: the imposed shame, the judgment of others, the role of victim. When she boarded the bus, carrying only a small suitcase, her mother was at the bus station. She didn't try to stop her. She just hugged her daughter and whispered, "Go, my child, and don't look back." Julia didn't look back. The capital city was a noisy monster that swallowed people whole without asking their names. Julia arrived on a rainy Tuesday, knowing no one. The address she had was for a cheap boarding house recommended by a distant cousin. The place smelled of mold and disinfectant. The room was tiny, but it was hers, for now. In the first few days, she looked for work. She dropped off resumes at stores, restaurants, offices. Her belly wasn't showing much yet, but when asked about availability, she hesitated. 6 months. She had 6 months until the baby was born. Who would hire someone who would soon need maternity leave? The rejections came quickly. "We'll call you. We're still evaluating. We don't have any openings right now." Polite, but firm. Julia noticed the pattern. When she mentioned her pregnancy, the conversation chilled. She tried to omit it, but the maternity leave question always came up. It was during one of these searches that she met Beatrice. She managed a non-profit organization that helped vulnerable women. The space operated in a converted warehouse with mismatched chairs and peeling paint. But there was something there that Julia hadn't felt in months: acceptance without judgment. "You don't need to explain anything," Beatrice said when Julia began to tell her story. "Here, we don't ask why. We ask, what do you need?" Julia needed shelter, food, work. Beatrice offered all three. In return, she would help organize the space, assist other women, and manage donations. It wasn't a salary, but it was survival. And survival at that moment was everything. The work was hard. Waking up early, organizing communal meals, listening to heartbreaking stories. Women who were beaten by their husbands, women who lost everything in scams, women who, like her, were abandoned while pregnant. Each story was a mirror, each tear an echo. But there was something transformative there. For the first time, Julia wasn't the only one hurting. And in shared pain, she found collective strength. She learned to sew clothes for newborns. She learned to create inventory spreadsheets. She learned to speak in public when Beatrice needed someone to present the project at a donor meeting. Julia trembled as she stepped up to the makeshift microphone. She looked at the people seated, all well-dressed, secure in their positions. She thought about giving up, but then she remembered her wedding day, the humiliation, the silence, and she decided she would never be silenced again. My name is Julia. I'm 26 years old and 5 months pregnant. I was abandoned at the altar, driven out of my town by judgment, and I arrived here with nothing. But in this space, I found something the world outside didn't give me, respect. And that's what we try to offer every woman who comes here, not pity, respect. The silence that followed was different from the one in the church. It wasn't embarrassment, it was reflection. In the end, 3 companies offered donations. A lawyer volunteered to provide free legal consultation, and a journalist asked to do a story about the non-profit's work. Julia didn't realize it, but she was becoming a leader. Beatrice noticed, "You have a gift, girl. People listen to you because you don't speak down to them. You speak from the heart." Meanwhile, in the small town, Michael returned. Not triumphant, but defeated. The business he'd tried to start in New York had failed. Debts grew. Friends disappeared. Alone and without resources, he returned to his parents' house, and there he began to hear about Julia. Not the humiliated Julia, but a new Julia, the one in the capital, the one making a difference, the one who had appeared in a news report talking about overcoming adversity. He watched the video 3 times. He didn't recognize that woman. Where was the submissiveness? Where was the dependence? Julia spoke with firmness, gestured with confidence, looked directly into the camera. And she was pregnant. His child. The one he had abandoned. Remorse came mixed with wounded pride. He needed to see her, not out of love, out of ego, because he couldn't bear the idea that she was doing well without him, that his narrative of a man who had fled because he wasn't ready had lost its power. Michael got the non-profit's address and traveled to the capital. He arrived unannounced. He entered the warehouse and saw her from behind, organizing boxes. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied back, her belly large. But there was a dignity in her that he didn't remember seeing before. Julia. She turned slowly. Her face showed no surprise, only weariness. Michael, I needed to see you. I needed to explain. Explain what? That you left me alone at an altar full of people, that you disappeared without a word, that you turned me into the laughingstock of the entire town. He swallowed hard. I was scared. Scared of being a father, of not being able to handle it, of taking responsibility. She completed the sentence coldly. But I did, alone, and it wasn't fear that moved me. It was necessity. Michael tried to approach, but she raised her hand. No, you don't get to step back into my life now that it's finally making sense. You had your chance. You wasted it. And I learned one thing these past months. Time has taught me to forgive what I don't need to reclaim. The words echoed in the empty warehouse. Michael stood still, without a response. Julia returned to organizing the boxes as if he were no longer there. And for her, indeed, he wasn't. 3 weeks after that encounter, Beatrice received a phone call that would change everything. The city council was launching a public tender for social projects. The winner would receive funding for 3 years and institutional support. It was the chance the non-profit needed to become established. Beatrice called Julia. We're going to apply, but I need someone to lead the proposal. Someone who knows the reality, who can speak well, who has credibility. Me? Julia asked, incredulous. You? The deadline was short. 10 days to draft the project, budget and action plan. Julia barely slept during this period. She wrote, rewrote, researched. Other women from the non-profit helped. One did the accounting, another designed the layout, another proofread the text. It was collective work, but Julia was at the center. On the 9th day, as they were about to finalize, they discovered a problem. The tender required the organization to have its own headquarters or a registered deed of use agreement. The non-profit operated in a warehouse verbally lent by a supportive businessman. Without a document, the application would be invalidated. Beatrice panicked. "I'll call Mr. Robert now. He'll sign it." But the businessman was traveling, unreachable for 3 days, and the deadline was tomorrow. Julia felt the old sense of helplessness return. It was always like this. When things started to go right, something collapsed. She looked at the document in her hands, the project that represented months of work, and wanted to give up. It was then that Carla, one of the women helped by the non-profit, approached. "Julia, do you remember when I arrived here? I had lost everything. My husband kicked me out of the house, kept the deeds, left me with nothing. You helped me gather documents, taught me to fight for my rights. And do you know what I won in court? The right to use a property, a small warehouse, but it's mine, and it's empty." Julia looked at her, not understanding. Carla smiled. "I'm offering it. If we transfer the non-profit there, you'll have the registered document. Everything is in order at the registry office." The silence was broken by a collective cry, not of sadness, but of hope. That woman, who months earlier had arrived broken, was offering the only asset she possessed. Because she had learned something fundamental there. Solidarity isn't charity. It's reciprocity. The application was submitted at the last minute. Julia returned home exhausted, but with a new feeling. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt that the future wasn't a threat. It was a possibility. 2 weeks later, the list of semi-finalists was released. They were among the 10 selected. The final phase consisted of a public presentation before a panel of judges. Date set, 1 month from then, exactly 1 week before her due date. Julia calculated the risks. She could go into labor during the presentation. She might not have the energy to speak in public. She could. But then, she remembered something Beatrice had once said. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it. She prepared like never before. She rehearsed her speech until she had it memorized. She studied the numbers, the strategies, the impacts. She asked Carla for help, who had experience speaking at community meetings. She sought advice from a university professor who had offered to mentor the project. And on the eve of the presentation, she did something symbolic. She took the wedding dress stored in the box and brought it to the non-profit seamstress. "I want you to turn this into something useful." The seamstress smiled. "It will become a baby layette for the babies born here." On the day of the presentation, Julia was 38 weeks pregnant. Her enormous belly made movements difficult. Getting onto the stage required help. But when she took the microphone and looked at the audience, something clicked. She wasn't there asking for a favor. She was there showing a solution. "Good morning. My name is Julia, and I represent a project that was born not from academic theories, but from real pain. Each of the 47 women helped by our non-profit has a story of exclusion, but they also have a story of resistance. And that's what I'm going to talk about, transforming wounds into bridges." Her speech lasted 15 minutes. Julia didn't use jargon. She didn't appeal for pity. She showed concrete data. How many women found employment after training? How many returned to school? How many rebuilt family relationships? And she ended with a sentence that echoed in the room. "We don't want to be saved. We want to be respected, and respect begins with opportunity." The audience applauded, but Julia barely heard it. A sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gripped the chair, trying to hide it. Beatrice noticed and rushed to help her. "Let's go to the hospital now." Julia shook her head. "There are still the judges' questions. I can manage." The questions came. She answered each one with clarity, even as the contractions intensified. When they finally finished, she was taken directly to the hospital. 6 hours later, Daniel was born. Healthy, wailing, perfect. And as she held her son for the first time, a message arrived. The project had won. Julia had won. 3 months after Daniel's birth, the awards ceremony took place in a packed auditorium. Politicians, businessmen, journalists. The mayor would go on stage to officially announce the funding. But before that, backstage revealed tensions. One of the judges, a conservative city councilman, questioned the choice. A single woman, a single mother, leading a project funded with public money? What kind of message does that send? Another judge, a university professor, retorted, "It sends the message that competence has nothing to do with marital status." But she was abandoned at the altar. That's public knowledge. People will criticize. So what? Her project saved 47 women from destitution. How many lives has your term saved? The discussion leaked to the press. A columnist wrote an article defending Julia. Another questioned whether this type of profile should be a role model for young people. Social media was divided. Hashtags trended. The national debate revolved around an old question: does a woman need to be perfect to deserve opportunity? Julia read the criticisms and felt the familiar weariness return. Always the same narrative. Always the same judgment. No matter what she did, someone would find a reason to disqualify her. She thought about giving up on the award ceremony, but Beatrice was firm. If you give up, they win. And it's not just about you. It's about all the women who come after. If you concede now, you're saying they're right. Julia decided to go, but not silently. She asked to speak before the mayor. The organization hesitated but relented. On the day of the ceremony, the auditorium was tense. Cameras pointed, microphones on. Julia walked onto the stage carrying Daniel in her arms. The choice was deliberate. She hid nothing. She didn't pretend to be something she wasn't. I could start by thanking you, but I'm going to start by telling a truth. I shouldn't be here. According to many, I should be hidden, ashamed, silent. Because women like me don't deserve awards. They deserve punishment. The silence was absolute. Julia continued, her voice firm. I was abandoned at the altar because I was pregnant. The man who promised to love me disappeared, and the society that should have supported me condemned me, not him, me, as if the pregnancy was my fault, as if the abandonment was a deserved punishment. She took a deep breath. But I learned something these past months. I learned that the shame isn't in being abandoned. The shame is in who abandons, and more importantly, the shame is in those who judge women for situations they didn't choose to face. Daniel started to cry. Julia rocked him gently without stopping her speech. This boy in my arms didn't ask to be born into a difficult situation, but he was born, and I could have chosen the easy path. Accept the role of victim, wait for someone to save me, conform to the narrative that women like me need pity. But I chose another path. I chose to build. People in the audience began to stir, some with discomfort, others with empathy. The project that won me this award isn't mine. It belongs to all the women who, like me, were judged before they were heard, to all who were excluded before they were understood, to all who were called failures for situations they didn't control. And I am here today to say, we will no longer accept this narrative. Her voice rose in tone. We will no longer accept that male abandonment is excused with he wasn't ready. We will no longer accept that single motherhood is treated as a moral failing. We will no longer accept that competence is measured by marital status. She looked directly into the camera. This award isn't validation. It's recognition of something that already existed. The strength of those who don't give up. And if my story makes you uncomfortable, good, because comfortable stories don't change anything. The applause began slowly. One person, then another, until it turned into an ovation. Julia descended from the stage with Daniel in her arms, exhausted but whole. The city councilman who had questioned her choice was approached by journalists on his way out. He tried to justify his criticisms, but the words sounded hollow against the speech Julia had just given. He realized too late that he had chosen the wrong side of history. 6 months after the award ceremony, the non-profit moved into a spacious new location. Carla's warehouse, renovated with part of the funding, became a reference center. A sewing room, a library, a daycare, a community space. The walls, once peeling, now featured murals painted by the women themselves. Each drawing told a story of overcoming. Julia coordinated everything with the efficiency of someone who had learned to manage crises. But she had changed. Not just in her demeanor or confidence, she had changed in how she viewed her own past. Her wedding day had ceased to be a trauma and had become a milestone. The point where everything began to make sense. It was on a Saturday afternoon, during an integration event, that Michael appeared again. Julia saw him from afar, standing at the door, hesitant. She finished her conversation with a volunteer and went to him. "What do you want, Michael?" He was different, thinner, unshaven, tired eyes. "I want to meet my son." Julia didn't answer immediately. She looked at Daniel, who was playing in Beatrice's lap. She looked at Michael, and she realized something. He hadn't come out of love. He had come out of belated remorse, because he couldn't bear his own insignificance compared to what she had built. Daniel has fathers. He has several. There's Mr. John, who fixes his toys. There's Professor Anthony, who reads him stories. There's Rodney, who... I'm his biological father. Biology doesn't make a father, Michael. Presence does, and you chose not to be present. I was scared. So was I, but I faced it. You fled. He tried to argue, but she interrupted him. I'm not stopping you from meeting him, but it will be on my terms, in my time, and with psychological counseling. Because Daniel won't grow up thinking that men can disappear and come back whenever they want. Michael nodded, defeated. He left, knowing he wouldn't have the role he had imagined. Julia hadn't blocked access. She had merely set boundaries. And for the first time, he understood that she no longer needed him. She never had. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Julia was organizing old papers when she found a copy of the authorization Carla had provided to register the non-profit in the warehouse. It was the document that had saved the project. But looking closely, she noticed something. A different signature at the bottom. It wasn't the current owners. It was someone who had signed years earlier when the property was still in judicial dispute. Julia took the document to a volunteer lawyer at the non-profit. He analyzed it and turned pale. "Julia, this document is problematic. There's a signature that could invalidate the registration. If anyone challenges this, you lose your headquarters." Fear returned. After everything they had built, the threat of losing the space was devastating. But then, the lawyer continued, "Unless we find the original authorization. If it exists and is registered, it nullifies any challenge." Carla was contacted. She rummaged through all the documents she had. Nothing. The original authorization had disappeared. Someone should have a copy at the registry office, but the old records were disorganized. It would require sifting through physical archives, box by box. Julia, Beatrice, and Carla spent 3 days at the registry office, searching. When they were about to give up, a retired clerk appeared. He had heard about the search and remembered the case. "I personally filed that document. I know exactly where it is." He led them to a dusty storage room, opened a rusty metal box, and pulled out a yellowed folder. There it was, the original authorization, signed by the judge who had resolved the dispute. Carla had legal right to the property, and consequently, the non-profit had the right to operate there. The document was re-registered with all formalities. The threat was neutralized. And Julia realized once again that life had strange ways of validating those who persevere. At the end of the year, the non-profit organized a closing party. It was a celebration and also a farewell. Julia announced that she would be stepping back from direct management. She wouldn't abandon the project, but would nurture new leaders. Other women needed to have the chance she had had. During the party, Beatrice made a toast. 2 years ago, a woman arrived here with a small suitcase and a shattered dream. Today, she leaves behind a solid structure and 50 transformed lives. Julia, thank you for teaching us that starting over isn't weakness, it's courage. Julia smiled, holding Daniel. And then she did something symbolic. She took the wedding dress, now transformed into several baby jumpsuits, and distributed them to the mothers present. This was a symbol of what I lost. Now it's a symbol of what we built together. The women held the garments with reverence. Each one knew the weight of that transformation. What was shame had become purpose. What was pain had become a network. What was abandonment had become community. And when Julia left there at the end of the night, with Daniel asleep in her arms, she stopped in front of a public clock. 10 o'clock at night. The same time her wedding should have started 2 years earlier. She smiled. Time, after all, had taught her not only to forgive, it had taught her to rebuild. If this story touched your heart, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs to remember that abandonment doesn't define destiny. Strength lies in those who rise, rebuild, and transform pain into purpose. Tell us in the comments, what was the moment in the story that moved you the most? Your voice matters. See you in the next story.